It is a particular pleasure welcoming to you a very, very special guest for our Spotlight talk on global digital governance and international trade. And it is a great pleasure, Rebecca Greenspan, Secretary General, United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, UNCTAD, to welcome you today to our conference on resilience, artificial intelligence. And we just had a wonderful panel where we talked about the resilience of global value chains. Now we want to hear from you and from trade and from the UNCTAD and what you are doing. What you are observing in international trade and international investment. Without further ado, I don't want to do lengthy introductions because you can say everything so much better. I hand it over to you. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, we do have an audience here, so it's...
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you to the organizers of the Aspen Institute Berlin Conference and to the distinguished panelists and alumni and everybody there that is accompanied us. So really it's an honor to be here with you today, delivering this spotlight talk on global digital governance and international trade. As was said, my name is Rebecca Greenspan. I am the new Secretary General of UNCTAD, the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. And you know that UNCTAD over the years has proudly shone a light on the complex dynamics of the topic at hand. And it is my duty today to do justice to our devoted research, hoping as well to learn from you, from all these bright minds at the Aspen Conference. My spotlight talk today is divided in three parts. First, I will give you a brief overview of the state of the world with respect to trade and investment as I see it now. Second, I will share with you some UNCTAD's thought leadership on the emerging issue of digital governance and international trade, with a specific focus on the issue of data flows. And lastly, I will propose some potential multilateral solutions that can produce more inclusive outcomes in this area. So let me start with the current context. Despite recent headwinds, UNCTAD expects the global economy to bounce back with GDP growth of 5.3% this year. This is the fastest growth we have had in 50 years. So we are not talking about a small rebound, we are talking about a robust rebound. But this number, however, is very deceiving because this 5.3 rate of growth is simply an average. And as you know, we live in a very unequal world. And when there is great inequality, averages hide more than they reveal. The truth is much more complex and much less rosy for many of the countries of the world. And to remember Dickens, this is really a tale of two recoveries. Apart from China, most developing countries will recover much more slowly and will suffer more long-term damage than advanced countries due to this crisis. So the risk of a lost decade for many developing countries is real. We calculate the total cost of the pandemic for developing countries, including foregone income, at $13 trillion. In many advanced countries, this cost in the long term is almost negligible. Let me give you two examples. In the case of Germany, the IMF estimates that by 2025, German GDP will be just 0.8% lower than what it would have been. And in the case of the US, it will be higher precisely because of the very important fiscal and monetary packages that have been put forward. Yes. Now, this is not $13 trillion in foregone income that the developing countries will experience. So let me go into some details in terms of trade and investment. World trade, as everybody knows, has been greatly affected by COVID-19 pandemic. And the international flow of goods and services dropped around 5.6% last year. And international investment, and this is very important to take into account, international investment dropped 35%. Developing countries are bearing the brunt of these drops. According to our research, announced greenfield investments projects in developing countries fell by 44% in 2020. More worrisome is that everything fell. It was not only foreign investment, it was domestic investment, it was public and private domestic investment that were also seriously affected. It's very important for our subject of digitalization and bringing, more modern infrastructure to these countries, because precisely that is what was most affected, particularly in key sectors for achieving the SDGs. So as a result, we lost much of the progress in promoting such investments for SDGs that happened since 2015. So we lost the progress that we have made in 1 year. Yes. Many countries, as you know, Latin America, for example, went back 2 decades in terms of extreme poverty last year, 2 decades. So there is something wrong in what we are calling development when you lose 2 decades of progress in 1 year. Yes. So let's say it's true, and I think that the good news is that trade and investment since then rebounded. The recovery of the global economy, has been strong, but still, too divergent in terms of the countries. The second point is that the recovery of the global economy is really threatened by high freight rates and the disruption of the global value chains, which is likely to continue in coming months. This was the subject of the last panel, yes, so I won't go into much detail in here. But in terms of the freight rates, let me say that according to our calculations, increased shipping costs may add to inflation 1.5%. Yeah, 1.5%. And the problem, the additional problem to that is already really high, yes, by any standards. But the thing is that, for example, in small island developing states, this will be not 1.5, but 7.5%, affecting food and essential imports in many of these countries. So there are many reasons behind the rise in shipping costs, and I don't have time to go into all of them. There are supply factors and there are demand factors. I would say that in the supply side, we have higher energy costs. We have lower turnaround times at ports, because ports cannot work 24/7 because of the health conditions and the sanitary, restrictions. And there are key parts of the global supply chain that continue to have COVID outbreaks. And we are seeing that precisely now with the new variant. So in the global side, for, the global demand for goods is much higher than it was in pre-COVID times, particularly in the advanced economies and in the US. So if you put these factors together, we have bottlenecks in the supply side to meet the same level of demand that we had before. And on top of that, demand also is much higher. And in the demand side, it has been said many times, the largest stimulus packages in many advanced countries is something to be considered because money was sent to the households, and that is good because allowed households to really face the shortages in the decrease in income. But a bigger factor is a secular change in consumer patterns. And we know that e-commerce raised a lot because of the lockdowns, and that produced a shift in the demand, favoring goods instead of services. So the money couldn't be spent in restaurants, so it was spent in things that you buy online. So all these factors are really pushing the cost increases in transport since the demand for goods went up around 20%. Yes. So all these factors are affecting different parts of the world, and we think that for this to go away, we will have to go for investment that is medium term, not short term. So there are not very quick fixes for most of this, but what we have to bear in mind is that we have to differentiate the impact in the different countries to take the right decisions. So let me go to the second part in terms of governance and the data divide. So as we know, last year we will be remembered, among other things, as the year people went online like never before. The great lockdown was also the great upload. Yes, in regions like Latin America, for example, e-commerce grew in 9 months what investors expected to be in 3 years. Yeah. So the share of e-commerce in global retail sales surged from 16 to 19% in 2020. And the share of digitally deliverable services in global services exports went from 52% to 64%. This also boosted data traffic. Yes, global internet bandwidth rose by 35% in 2020. The largest one-year increase almost in the last decade. So as a result, never have people's life been so dependent on access to real-time data and technology. From monitoring and controlling the spread of the pandemic and the way we carry out our daily activities, such as working, studying, shopping, to the manner through which scientists have been able to develop new vaccines in record time. So this is another lesson from this crisis. We have really a success in science and really a failure in governance. And we have to preclude that this will be also the story in the digital economy. Yeah. Now, beyond issues of technology infrastructure, this increased reliance on data is also generating concerns. And we have to talk about the concerns too. For example, related to privacy infringements, implications for national security, and the possibility of the criminal abuse of data. For example, a Cisco survey in 2020 found that 60% of people expressed concerns about their data being protected in the apps that are tracing their activities and that even were used for the pandemic. So there is a mistrust being built that may affect a lot what we want to achieve. Not surprisingly, data has emerged as a key economic and strategic source. There is today a race for economic and strategic leadership in terms of harnessing data, with the United States and China as the clear front runners. Let me give you some numbers on this because they are very striking. China and the US account for half of the world's hyperscale data centers, half. They account for 70% of the artificial intelligence talent. And they account for 90% of the market capitalization of the largest digital platforms. So, for example, only 4 companies, Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, Google, and Alibaba, account for 2/3 of the world cloud infrastructure revenues. Not only flows, revenues. And only 5 platforms, Alibaba, Amazon, Facebook, Google, and Tencent, receive more than 70% of global digital advertisement. So the concentration that we are seeing in the industry is something that we have to take into account for any governance proposal for the future. Most developing countries and most smaller businesses obviously have limited capacities to transform data into business opportunities and into economic and social development. So this places us at a disadvantage in a world economy that is becoming increasingly digitalized. In a word, the conventional connectivity-related divide, digital divide, is rapidly being compounded by a growing data divide. It's not only digital, it's a data divide. The extent to which people use the internet range from more than 80% in Europe to less than 30% in Africa. And the use is even lower in rural areas. We know that. And we know that less than half of the least developed countries have data protection and privacy laws in place. Many developing countries also lack the relevant skills and other resources to make productive use of data collected. So what I want to say is that in this new configuration, developing countries risk becoming mere providers of raw data to global digital platforms, while paying for the digital intelligence obtained from their data. So let me put an example of oil. This is the same as oil producers giving their petrol for free and then paying for the gasoline. And that is an asymmetry that we will have to face. This is like a new way of reprimarization of the economies without any revenue, yes? So this brings me to the last part of my talk, the problem of global digital governance and international data flows. So the issue could not be more important. Data can be used to generate a lot of social value and also private profits. Both are true. How large these benefits will be, how large the social value will be, and how they will be shared depends greatly on the rules agreed upon to govern data and data flows, and on our capabilities to transform data into digital intelligence for the common good. In fact, how we handle data will to a great extent affect our ability to meet the sustainable development goals themselves. A growing numbers of international agreements are dealing with data flows. The international debate on digital governance is currently at an impasse, reflecting diverging views and positions. Current regulatory frameworks tend to be either too narrow in scope or too limited geographically. With the EU, the US, and China, the world's 3 largest economies, each dealing differently with the issue with different emphasis. Some emphasize the role of the state, the others emphasize the role of the private sector, and others emphasize the role of the citizens in the governance architecture. So we need a new balanced global approach to data governance that meets a middle ground solution. Extreme positions on cross-border data flows will not be helpful. Let me say that up front, yes? as neither strict data localization nor fully free data flows are likely to satisfy most countries' development objectives. So global governance is important that will avoid further fragmentation of the internet and will enable global data sharing to mitigate widening inequalities, to enhance trust in the digital economy, and to deal with the market dominance of some digital platforms. As of today, no one has all the answers on how to deal with this. And there is certainly no one-size-fits-all solution. What is needed now is for us to come together across nations, across disciplines, and across stakeholder groups to engage in structured policy dialogue that facilitate progress in this area. We believe that the United Nations is the best platform for this dialogue to take place, as it involves all relevant parties and relies on universal membership. So, dear friends, it is more important than ever to embark on a new path for digital and data governance. The current fragmented data landscape is the worst of all possible worlds. We risk missing out from the huge social value digital technologies offer, and to lose whatever we have gained through privacy breaches and cyber attacks. Fragmentation only helps those who do well in a world without rules. For this, we need coordination, we need leadership, and we need basic agreements. So, as in the case of climate change and pandemics, only a global response can develop appropriate governance framework. And the process of developing such frameworks should start now. Here again, to deal with data and its opportunities and risks requires a global response. I thank you.
Madam Secretary General Rebecca, I can only say wow. When we were planning this conference, I told my team I want to have her in the conference because I don't want to make this a discussion just among Western developed countries, but I want to make this into a global discussion. And thank you so much for sharing your insights. Since we do have the pleasure of having a real audience here, I want to ask our audience, I think we have time for maybe 2 questions to take the opportunity to ask Rebecca a couple of questions. And I also, yes, please. And the mic is coming.
Thank you very much. My name is Wolfgang Kleinwächter. I'm a professor emeritus, and I was a member of the ICANN board and the Global Commission on Stability in Cyberspace. You mentioned the UN as the main platform for a global governance system. Is the roadmap on digital cooperation proposed by Secretary General Guterres the right way? And what do you expect from the proposed Global Digital Compact?
Thank you so much. What I also want to do in our conference, linking the different panels with each other. So, Joanna, may I call on you? And we do have to disinfect the mic in between. That's why it always takes a second.
Okay. Science-based. Sorry, a bit ironic there. I was blown away by the talk. Thank you so much. I did have a question towards the end when you talked about that we have to do this without rules, because I guess it depends. Obviously, the international community is in some sense an anarchy, but there are some kinds of rules and structures. And the EU has shown ways that you can coordinate within nations sometimes too, or within groups of nations. So I was wondering, is it really with no rules at all, or is there something we can do to create? I mean, you said we had to have agreements instead of rules, but I guess I was confused about the structures, is there anyone who can provide some kinds of rules?
Okay, and just 1 second, because one thing I always also like to do is giving our young Aspen members the opportunity, our Nachwuchs, to ask a question to somebody who they wouldn't usually meet. Linda or Ina or Annika, do you want to ask Rebecca a question? Don't be shy. I guess they're too shy. All right, then we turn it back to you.
Okay, first to Wolfgang's question is very important. First of all, Wolfgang, I think that it's very important that this issue was put forward by the Secretary General in his proposal of our common agenda, looking for the future. And he calls it our common agenda. And a big part of that had to do not only, as I said, with the digital divide, but with all the implications. And that's why I really dig further in the data flow problem. So I think that the Secretary General understands that this was not dealt with in the SDGs agenda. And it's not that our common agenda is a different thing, but it brings a more futuristic perspective to issues that can be very important for our common future, as the Secretary General says. And in a way, I really think that we need to go beyond the Global Digital Compact. I have to be honest in here. Because, for example, we need the scientists to come and help us in understanding what is happening and what are the regulations and evidence-based and of what are the solutions for the future with respect to what I referred to. But the scientists are all in different places, and many of them in the industry, yes, in the platforms. It's the same that happened with the environmental problem, yes, where when we gather the scientific crowd around finding solutions and giving us the evidence with respect to the environment and climate change, we were able to go ahead in many of the solutions and draft the agreements that we need to go further. I think that we need to do the same this time. It's not only a global compact negotiation. We need to put together all what is needed to really go deeper into the problem that we are facing. Because at the end, there is this concentration of power also that is happening. And it's also a democratic question, that the one that we are facing. It has to be multidimensional. It has to be multi-stakeholder. It has to be a complex, unfortunately, complex for the solutions to be the right ones. So I think that it has to receive more attention. And I think that the academic world has to come much stronger, in this, really to give us, the practitioners and the politicians of the world, a more thoughtful, research to go ahead. So I think that we have to go beyond, in short, of the Global Digital Compact. It's important, but we have to go farther. With respect to the second question, I didn't hear the name, but I'm sorry, probably my Spanish English was in the way here. But my words were, fragmentation only helps those who do well in a world without rules. I am all for rules and agreements, all for rules and agreements. They have to be intelligent rules, yes, and they have to be intelligent regulations. And remember, I come from a small country, so small countries, we only will survive in a rules-based world, yes? We won't be able to protect ourselves in the power game with a power game world. We need agreements, rules, and regulations.
Thank you very, very much. And the person who asked that question was Joanna Bryson, who is a professor at the Hertie School here in Berlin for technology and ethics. So, Rebecca, I know that you do have to leave. Thank you so very, very much. I'm a great fan of UNCTAD, and I laud the work you're doing on investment screening, investment protection, but also particularly on digital trade. And I always tell my business colleagues, do look more at UNCTAD, not just at the WTO. I'm pretty sure that you have now a lot more fans in this audience. Thank you very, very much.